Good evening and welcome to the fourth, I think it is, Insightflow Cafe event series thing. My name is Graham Reddick. I am one of the co-founders of Insightflow. Insightflow exists or will exist, we're just building the main part of it at the moment, to improve market research, to make it faster to create insights, to link researchers and research to business in more fundamental ways. And we passionately believe that market research can and should be done in a better way for many, many more people. So that's Insightflow. We do have the Insightflow Cafe live at insightflow.io. So if you're not a member of our lovely little thriving community, do come and join us. The water is very warm and we're very friendly. I'm delighted to have these two characters on with me this evening, both of whom have over, in one case the last year or so, and the other case the last 6 or 7 years, given me a huge amount of fun, insight, but also have been great people to have sometimes serious conversations with. So first of all, welcome Jason. Jason's the founder of Morse Code. Jason his background is basically anything to do with data, technology, and research and customer knowledge. And he's got 20 years experience of doing this. He has had the odd little foray into other things like gemstones, which we'll have to talk about at some point. Welcome, Jason. Thank you so much. Ben Smithwell, the famous CX guru, thought leader, and TEDx speaker. I promised him before the call that I wasn't going to wind him up, but he gets slightly wound up by anybody being called a CX guru and thought leader. So there we go. Oh, and award-winning service designer and CX expert. Ben's worked with a whole range of large and small organizations, from Slimming World to Renault Bank, to help them improve their customer understanding and to deliver spectacular customer experiences. So welcome, Ben. Thank you very much, both.
Good to be here, thanks.
We're here tonight to talk about AI. And it is kind of the let's talk about Kevin sort of conversation, because AI seems to be one of these subjects that sparks some fairly passionate responses, both for and against it. And when we were setting up the name of the event, we did actually come to utopia or dystopia fairly quickly, because the world does seem to be quite heavily split between the two. We're going to talk about 3 or 4 different areas of this, but let's just start with the easy question, guys. What do we mean by AI? And perhaps more importantly, what do we not mean by AI? Jason, I'll let you go first.
Oh, thanks. It's an interesting question, because it depends who you ask, in my opinion, and what their experience or exposure to it has currently been. I speak to people within my social circle that don't have any engagement with technology, that have watched films and have an opinion that's, you know, similar to an Alexa walking around in a sort of cyborg body doing stuff and taking over the world, to doctors and people like that use image recognition and AI to learn how to spot cell mutations and things. And the way I use it, from text analysis to understand language. So whether it's something generalistic, if you like, and you have narrow AI, which is kind of where everything realistically is at the moment, and you kind of have this mid-ground of sort of general AI, which is, you know, much more generalistic with your Alexas and things, but then you've got your sort of stuff that's coming where real AI will sort of emerge, if you like, I think, which is sort of, you know, the stuff you read about with Musk and neural evolution, and AI writing its own programs, making its own decisions based on its own experiences without too much human intervention. And that's when AI really will become, in my opinion anyway, AI. But it depends, again, like who you ask. Different fields of expertise and different reasons for using it, different people's opinions seem to resonate most.
Sure, but I mean, AI is also misused, isn't it, Ben? It's a term that is used loosely in cases where it's quite clearly not AI. Do you not think?
Yeah, and this is where I have to declare my interest here as the house troglodyte. So I suppose I've spent probably the last 15, 20 years or whatever trying to understand humans, I'd say the hard way, by sort of rolling up my sleeves and getting mucky and dirty and observing people and speaking to people, that kind of. So that's the angle I come at this from. I think I've been seeing over the years all sorts of things come to market. Obviously working in consulting or whatever, you get it seems a phone call every other week from someone claiming to have this next wonderful shiny thing. When you go under the hood, it's really the thing that counts the number of times a word occurred in a bloody contact center call log, and it's really not doing what it says on the tin. So I think my background with this has been I'm entirely whelmed, I think, is my experience to date. Yeah.
But just look at those things, and we'll come on to AI in research and in the detail in a moment or two. But let's just do the other side of it, though. Things that are happening that people call AI that just aren't. I can think of several examples, and I know that there's plenty of cases of we are an AI-driven platform, which is actually you're just a semantic matching platform or whatever. And in your experience, Ben, I mean, I know that you might have in the past described AI as smart companies selling mediocre software to dumb buyers. You are responsible for that quote.
Yeah, thanks. I think it comes down to the nature of what are these things, and to my mind, they're tools, right? I suppose, what is a tool? So a tool, I think, is probably something that enhances the skill of the craftsman that's using it, perhaps exponentially. And I think the problem is that often we're not giving the tool to craftsmen. I think that's back to my quote you had there. We're not giving it to craftsmen. It's more like throwing a chainsaw into a chimp's tea party and hoping for great things to happen. I think a lot of people, and just from experience in lots of different industries, they're not very humans or insight literate or research literate at the best of times. I think that's where I struggle with some of the things. I'm not saying it's all bad. I am being devil's advocate today. There's lots of good stuff out there. But I think for a lot of these things, if you don't really know how you're using it or how to use it to best effect, it could actually be worse than if you hadn't used the damn thing at all. And I've seen some quite simple AI packages being deployed that essentially just count up different kinds of words and very light touch semantic analysis, and companies, very big companies, jumping to all sorts of crazy conclusions based on a highly unsophisticated analysis of something that I wouldn't hang my hat on. So I think that's the overall picture of what I'm seeing when it works badly, anyway.
Sure. And Jason, do you get asked to do things that either aren't AI or that AI can't do because people are misunderstanding it?
Yes, and a lot of the time it's strange because AI almost in a way does make almost any task possible on a quantitative scale, but it takes a big budget to be able to, one, collect the data from a number of sources that whilst they can see, you've got to build the routes in and out to do, and then you've got to formulate that data, for instance, process it and make it meaningful. And I think it's almost like what Ben said, rather than going back to sort of our part one of, AI isn't sort of at any level to sort of, complete or, overdo the Turing test, for instance. But when you're talking about, say, actual jobs and specific tasks where, say, it can give an intelligence and it can get better through its experiences and aid someone to do the job, if you like, on that specific task, then yes, it's
Okay, so just moving this on slightly then to specifics. In the market research world, where do you see it can help and can deliver true value, and where do you see it probably isn't there yet, or possibly will never get there? Jason, your thoughts on that, given that that's your environment very much at the moment?
Yeah, I've worked with and I'm working with quite a few companies that are implementing not what, say, Ben and I would both agree on being actual AI, but certainly a form of narrow AI, whereby It's working on response. It's using cloud services to process that data. It's making a decision based on multiple scenarios that it's not actually, you know, there's no lexicon or library that says if it's specifically this, do that. It's actually taking maybe the semantic meaning or something like that and responding with an action that's collecting, say, more data. A company, MR for instance, have implemented, it's almost like an AI assistant within their survey platform that when respondents don't give, they maybe not give a long answer. They might say, I don't know, because, you know, they just can't be bothered. They want to get through their survey quickly. The assistant, if you like, will go back and say, many thanks for that. Could you expand a little further? Or they say something of particular interest that it will ask to go back and ask them to give further detail on. Now, these are all put in against the project that you're running, rather than this being Alexa, if you like, and having a global knowledge on every topic or survey, conversation that comes through. But it's still using a model of learning, if you like, to process your instructions to go back and ask the right people for the right sort of further information at the right time. And it's interesting to see from my perspective, because I analyse the data, and I analyse data for lots of companies, and seeing the percentage of increase from a market research agency's perspective on they've written the same survey, but over a quantitative number of people are able to go back and just get that little bit more. It makes a huge difference to the data set at the end, which obviously gives you as the owner, I guess, of the, you know, the purchaser of that data, a much greater ability then to make your decisions on. And the ability to get, say, you know, it makes, in my guesstimates, I haven't run multiple data, you know, measurements on this, but overall you're talking about maybe 85% of sort of your open-ended questions that don't give you a decent response, you can further inquire about or get extra information. And over the entire survey with, say, 6 questions in, say, open-ended, it makes a significant difference. So it's certainly something that's being, you know, adopted in, say, just data collection. You guys will know as well, in the building of Insightflow, a data repository, that if you've got people searching for data, you're going to be using natural language processing search functionality to understand and group, aspect analyze what data you have available and pull that data in, almost similar to how a search engine works. So, you know, there's various different aspects in how AI is definitely being introduced into research, including, you know, reporting is a classic one. What I do with unstructured text and communication conversation is sort of almost where it's being proven, because it can analyze a hell of a lot of data very quickly. And then people like me can go in who understand it, we do it fast and can tidy that up and top and tail it. I had a great project the other day where AI would have been absolutely rubbish. I tried it with AI first, so I know it's rubbish. It was for a company with care in its name. They're a care provider for a care network of care homes and care centres. They were being asked how much they care about the level of care they provide, and the homonyms AI just fell over. I had to dual code the data set, but it was a great example where sort of any AI, really, you have to draw the line at. And it's one of the problems, I think, that go along with the AI as well, of the trust levels you apply to AI. Like you said, Graham, it's, yeah, I'm using AI, I've got this database. Well, I can tell you that different databases will give you a different set of results based on the same data, based on how much exposure that AI platform has had to pharmaceutical data, financial data, consumer data, or any of its previous learnings can skew and bias any new data that's introduced. So it's not kind of intelligent in that fashion. It's going to take
sure. Well, we'll come back to that, because we'll talk about the sort of pitfalls and the problems and what have you towards the end. But from your point of view, Ben, are you seeing AI? So you seeing AI impacting research either way, for the good or for the worse?
Yeah, 100%. So again, if I give you my perspective on it, so as a sort of dyed-in-the-wool, sleeves rolled up qualitative researcher at heart, sort of back in the day, if I think about what are some of the central problems to be solved there, of course, it's going to come down to scale. And I think there's no substitution for the richness you can get from observing people, from interacting with people in different ways. Of course, it's just simply impossible to scale it to the level of AI and that kind of level of analysis. And whenever you're dealing with research or market research, it's kind of a truth-seeking, sense-making thing you're going through there. And whenever you're trying to determine the truth about something, it's always going to be different types of data that sort of coalesce around something that suggests it's probably true or valuable or worthy. And the ability to take different types of data, qualitative and quantitative, and do something with that multimodal data, that for me, that's where it gets very, very, very exciting. I think the ability to stick a level or several layers of analysis and sophistication over a data set, that don't impress me much. But I think the ability to take lots of different types of inputs and then make inferences from it, that gets me giddy with excitement. So for instance, I think to summarize it, something that could give you intelligent hypotheses rather than reporting would be the absolute gold standard. Take these disparate sources of information, do something worthy with them, say, hey, perhaps investigate X, Y, and Z. That would be like catnip to any researcher, I guarantee it.
But do you believe that that's possible? Are you seeing any of that? Are you seeing the potential? I mean, sorry, just before you answer that, you remind me of something that we've been looking at and talking about on and off around Insightflow. Is that there's this thing of qualitative research at scale is becoming a thing, partly because of online, partly because actually, they're collecting information and data in different ways. So do you believe that this is going to happen? It is happening?
Yeah, I think and this is where my ignorance kicks in. I have to hand over to Jason in terms of the ins and outs of this. So right now, when I see qualitative stuff at scale, to me, it looks like we're taking qualitative, turning it into a set of quantitative metrics and analyzing it, analyzing it, that's the word. So I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, we're there yet. Do I think it's possible? Well, absolutely. With a will and a way and a bit of time, I'm sure we can start to do things like that. But again, I think Jason will have a much better take on what's coming around the corner.
Quite an easy one, this one, realistically, because Ben's 100% right, in my experience at least. The calculation part and the reporting part, AI is already massively helping out on. And there's not too much further it needs to go on that. But for it to go further, unless you're Google, Amazon, Apple, the big players, like IBM and the other companies that are also feeding off of all the other data sets that are going into their clouds, and they have that modeling experience. Unless you're those guys, then no. Those are the only guys that have it available right now, and it's being fed back into their products via themselves, obviously first, but otherwise, I
think there's something that might have to go alongside this. To if for me the utopia is true blended AI analysis over qual and quant, multimodal research and patches of stuff from over here and over there, if that's the gold standard, I think that one of the things that will prevent that will be, I think, just the basic skills of the business and the inability to ask the right questions of the AI itself. And so it's back to that thing around insight literacy, which I find is very, very low in just about every business I see, actually. Sometimes even within distinct research departments, you'll find people, they do anything to avoid having to speak to a customer because that's all horrible and mucky. So they're trying to distance themselves as far as possible. So I do wonder with some businesses, there's almost a peak that they could reach here until they invest in their staff and their skills and knowledge and just overall research and perhaps statistical literacy and these kinds of things.
So what you're saying there is
level
actually
of the humans and the AI, I think.
Yeah, for researchers to use AI, in one sense, they kind of have to get better at research.
It's the art of asking the best question of the data, I suppose, half the time. Yeah.
And you might actually be in a better position to answer this one. It's almost like marketing, for instance, have a much better grasp of what AI has the ability to do than market research. And it's almost in the wrong order. Marketing and market research I see as the chicken and the egg. And it's almost, depending on whether you're a service provider or a product provider, which one comes first. But it's almost like research always comes second. marketing always get the budget, and they go to other AI providers rather than looking at what they could do themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know, but maybe Ben could.
Well, so just my thought on that, and it was something again occurred to me earlier. I think that one of the reasons why that is true, and I think you're probably right in that it's true, is that marketing tends to be the one that generates the larger data sets, and then has the double impact. One, that they have greater need of analysis because they are producing larger amounts of data, but on the other hand, have more data to train AIs and to pull that through. Because I think that one of the issues around AI and market research is actually relatively limited data pools for the most part.
Yeah, there's a thing here around marketing. They're an interesting one. I think if I could lay the charge at any department of being addicted to quantitative pornography, it would definitely be marketing. Every day of the week, quant porn dashboards of stuff flashing on it. Again, it's like catnip for marketers for all sorts of different reasons. Again, when I speak to people in marketing departments, they're again back to this insight and research literacy thing. I find they're probably further down the tree than a lot of people actually, perhaps contrary to what I might expect. They're acting more like accountants than detectives. So it can be a bit of a blocker in that regard. I'm going to get shot for saying all this, aren't I?
No, you're not. It's not as if we're recording it and going to put it out to anybody. You're fine. It's all hidden. But okay. So you started earlier, Jason, to talk about some of the problems around it and some of the things that we can do. So the first one is I think bias. I think that's one of the first problems that people raise, both in its core programming and in its subsequent learning. So is that a big problem in your view, Jason? And secondly, what should we start to do to try and avoid it, or at least look out for it?
Quick answer to your first question. No, it's not a problem to me because I make a living out of beating AI. So it's good for me. It's good for me in that context. What can AI do to improve, or what can we do to improve it? I'm in conversations with people about training their models at the moment, for instance, on different topics. So it's not generalistic or anything like that, but they have set clients that they do a hell of a lot of research for, that they are similar questions across their research rosters, and they want to combine those data points and find, similarities and patterns, etc., like anyone would through them. But because of the volumes of data, etc., what's the most, time efficient and quantitative way effectively that they can get quick results out and minimize each time the amount of top up that they need to do. So keep my advice in sort of, I don't know, making things better perhaps is like you're doing realistically, keep your old data, because I've used legacy data that I've kept from previous surveys I've run and such, that I've trained my models with initially. And just having that data alone gave me starting points. Had I had loads of data, it would have been much more and faster journey. And likewise with, say, Insightflow actually coming on board later on, having a repository of other people's data that you can feed off of and use as well, is massively beneficial, especially if it's directed, and an output, if you like, from the research industry itself, because they conform to many of the similar formats. So it shouldn't be too difficult to remap that back into something sensible for either yourselves or actually your users.
Sure. And from your point of view, Ben, when do you see egregious instances of bias AI or poorly trained AI? I'm not sure which it falls into in those cases.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm close enough to it to give a worthy answer to that question. But I've got a question for Jason actually, which is around the positive uses of this, which is, you'll obviously have worked with a lot of different organizations, different types of businesses, different sectors. Are there characteristics of organizations that adopt this stuff and really get it right and kind of reap the benefits? Are there commonalities there? So it's not just, dump the AI thing in there, turn on the switch and run away. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, a lot of FMCG things and things you'll buy off the shelf, retail online experiences, for instance, because the path to purchase is so similar, if you like, on, is their website journey enough, blah, blah, blah. They're very, very similar. So the answers to those questions, if you like, can be quite easily modeled. A lot of the companies, funnily enough, that invest a lot of the money and get it wrong are those companies in the professional industries and services sectors, medical companies and things like that, due to especially a lot of the data that I take on and making note of healthcare and medical pharmaceutical surveys and research is a lot of their workers, for instance, in the employee space, English isn't their first language. So even though they're answering the same questions, they're only using the language that's available to them. So in that incident, it's but on a specific level, it's.
So just and in my case, a very relevant question given the projects we're running at the moment. One of the areas that I've for many years been looking at is the sort of semantic side of AI, the bit that we can get AI to tell us what something means. And we know, I think I was working with a bunch called Semantic Discovery from California in about 2003, trying to break this task. That feels like still being quite a long way away. But the more simple one, and perhaps the more market researched one, is how close are we to getting to AI delivering really great transcripts? Just take the sort of really basic thing of a great transcript from a recorded conversation, and if we can do that, do you see that that's something that will really helps market research? So the first part, how close are we, Jason, in your view?
In collecting a transcript and the things like that, for instance, what I found is it doesn't matter so much about the device that you're giving the interview or receiving it on. It's the environment you're in. Accents and things like that do play a part, if you like, and the more diverse accent, or the less exposure the AI has had to that accent, the more difficult it finds to accurately transcribe or translate. But the environment itself is the biggest application. The transcription services are growing. They're increasing all the time. There's transcription services now that even if you offer it one file, can depict between speakers and things like that. But again, it's similar to the text analysis side of things, where it has to work out ironies and things. You're running a report off of that or just asking it to transcribe words. So again, depending on what focus service you want it or your service to pick up on, at the end of that process where you get your results, depending where that AI is and how much you're using, can play the weakest part and
sure
your souffle, as they say.
I mean, and for you, Ben, do you see those relatively simple applications as being A, useful, or B, something that you would want?
I think they're always better on paper than in reality. So I've used a lot of different transcription services, and for me, this is just a personal preference. I'm not saying it's right or wrong here. For me, it's a binary proposition. Either it works perfectly or it's junk. I don't have to be worrying about trusting the transcription, and so I haven't found one that does it sort of near perfectly every single time. It's one of these things where I can definitely see brilliant uses for it, very, very good uses for it. A concern of mine, if I was, say, running an insight department within a big complex organization, would be every time we rely on this crutch to do part of the work for us, we're almost stealing the ability of the researcher at the front line to actually, again, have those sleeves fully rolled up and be fully in the moment, experiencing the research itself. So tools are great. I think it's knowing when to use them as well. I think at times we can rob our people of the context that they're trying to sit within and to understand. So there's no right or wrong answer, but I imagine within a couple of years these things will be, again, exponentially better. Again, if I think how things were, say, 5 years ago, they were just horrible to use and pretty awful. I've noticed things have got a lot better.
Well, it's certainly, and it's certainly something we're doing right at the moment. And one of the things we tested was every single available AI transcription service.
Oh, really?
And the only one that we found that actually produced your binary answer there was one that then had the overlay of a human review.
Oh, right. Okay.
So which I think now, and their claim is, and I think it makes complete sense. Their claim is they use AI to produce the base stuff, and then a human to roll over the top, and also using a glossary or whatever to say, actually, you know, when they're saying that those words, actually what they mean is that brand name, which is kind of phonetically like those words, but what have you. So, and it seems to produce some pretty decent results. But it's quite interesting because we're also working with a bunch who are doing some pretty interesting stuff around AI and understanding video.
Right.
And I think that this becomes really exciting, that you can actually start to get a searchable group of videos, a text searchable group of videos.
100%. Again, that is hugely exciting for me, the ability to be able to do that en masse.
Yeah. So, and I think all of these things are things that help the research world, but I still feel slightly in the back of my mind that you know, there is far too much big jazz hands about AI and possibly not enough critical thinking about AI. So I'm going to turn the question around. So, Jason, what questions should a market research organization be asking of potential AI suppliers to differentiate between those that are big jazz hands and not much, and those who actually know what they're talking about and are likely to do something useful?
This is my data type. What can you do with it, and what do you do for others like me? Because I work with a lot of data, and even companies I haven't worked with before, I can look through their data and I can come up with different things or the same things as agencies. But realistically, it comes down to what data you've got, against which tool you go to, which provider you use, based on their expertise in a way. And it's otherwise you'll get trapped into that thing I think Ben was alluding to earlier as well, whereby you need that human intervention and that capability, because otherwise, if everyone starts relying on the same AI platforms, you lose the competitive edge. And you also lose that connection with the human, which all of our data relates and that goes back to. So having a human involved at the stages, it makes a massive difference, especially when I'm debriefing clients on the data that I've just coded and everything else, because they haven't been close to it, they haven't seen the story. And I can highlight and illuminate little bits in there, the qualitative parts within a quantitative set, which can be valuable within sort of their presentations and things like that, almost like a summary.
And in that piece, so the sort of prove it, here is my data, what do you do with it? What do market research organizations have to be, or should they be asking questions about how the AI was trained, or the sort of the deeper knowledge parts of AI?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much on a technical basis in a sense. So it's more almost like what data has your AI been exposed to, or whose AI are you using? Because a lot of companies don't use their own AI. They'll use services, for instance, especially new companies that have small capital investment. We use services up front. We built our own AI later, etc. in the previous company. But it's that sort of stage process. Because if they're not using their own AI, then it's obviously realistically, in a sense, although they can give you an opinion of the AI that they're using, it's not theirs. If it's a big one like IBM or like, Amazon or Google or someone, you can be pretty confident that it's got a relatively high generalistic value of multiple topic exposure, which is going to give you a relatively sensible set of results back. And if it's, say, something and they've written it themselves and they're using another system to feed it or train that, and they're using that system, due to its lack of exposure, your results are going to be wildly maybe inaccurate, or not as accurate, certainly, as something that's had a better training education, if you like.
Now, and that actually leads me quite nicely to the question I was going to ask Ben. So Ben, from your point of view, what is it you're looking for when one of your client companies comes to you and says, hey, we've used AI? What is it you're looking for in the results, in the data, or what have you, to say this is good AI or this is bad AI, or run away fast?
It's a really good question, and this, I suppose, this exposes part of the issue here. Obviously, it's a very it's a very technical area, and there's a lot to learn there. And anyone who's a vague layperson like me, I'm sub layperson. The fact of the matter is, it's hard for me to determine what good actually looks like when so many people are making so many sort of commensurate claims. It's very difficult to actually sort the wheat from the chaff. Back to what, again, wonderful would look like for me is the ability of something, I think, to check that I'm asking the right questions, or the right hypotheses are being served. And so it's not only the AI, I think it's the willingness of the organization that's selling it, or sort of pitching it in, to, again, add their own human layer over the top of whatever they're getting, to help sort of tell me a story or something like that. So I think, and again, I'm not sure if my view on this is correct or not, but for me, I always come back to this notion of whatever the package is, it's going to be better if it's steered by a really, really shit hot human. And so if Jason's coming to me saying, I've got this whiz bang box of tricks, but we think it means this, or we're going to set it to investigate this now. So it's about remaining inquisitive, I think. And there's an organization I worked with last year, and they got an agency to do some AI work, which is really, really badly scoped and poorly thought out. And it came back, and it literally told them nothing. Quite literally told them nothing. They were kind of scratching their heads. It asked a terrible set of questions that AI wasn't even really equipped to give them an answer on. And so I think the ability to actually be creative and follow your instincts and be more like a detective than a market researcher in some ways, I think that's the way to go.
But that brings up I'm really interested, which we've kind of slightly danced around, but and have mentioned it. But when we are then working with AI, if we're market researchers working with AI, what are good questions to ask it, and what are bad questions to ask it? I mean, you've got that example, so I'll start with you there, but Ben.
That's a really good question. So I suppose that really depends what you're trying to get done here. Again, perhaps that's back to my gold standard. It's how can it help me to formulate the best questions based on the available evidence and data. And again, what humans have their hand on the tillers that can help me refine, as a researcher, as an interested party, what I should be actually trying to find out, because it's not always obvious. So say you're doing a discovery program for I don't know, whatever corporate, and it might be a strategy piece of work, and we think the problem statement is over here. Well, actually, it's way over there somewhere, and we never would have spotted that. But the ability of AI to take in, again, all these crazy, convoluted, mutually exclusive packages or types of data and churn something out at the end that says, we should look under this rock, that would be absolutely superb.
Sure. And okay, thank you. And for you, Jason, do you have a view of, when people come to you, that is a really silly question that AI can't answer, or that's a really good question that AI can answer? And do you have a view of what those look like when people are talking to you about that sort of stuff?
Most of the times it's frustrating if I can't think of an answer about myself, that I can't find the answer using AI, damn it. But there must be a way. I haven't met many questions that can't be solved, but I've met many budgets that can't be reached with regards to what they want to do. And with anything, price will come down. But no, I guess there's not really much that I see other than the trust level. And again, it comes down to the quality of, like Ben said, what you're looking to investigate, the type of data that you've received at the end of that through whichever channels it has been collected through, and then having an AI. If you're going to use services, it's a case of investing in building your own, and building it to do the job you want it to do effectively, I think.
Sure. Okay, so we've got a question in, it's quite fun. I'll put it to you. So the question reads, does the panel feel that the AI industry is doing enough to tackle potentially bad algorithms, which can be exclusionary rather than inclusive from a diversity and inclusion point of view? So this is one of the things that AI has a bit of a bad rep about, and both in non-diverse thinking for all sorts of reasons, and a sort of failure to be inclusive. So do you think the industry is looking at that? And really, this is going to be to you, Jason, primarily, but do you think that the industry is doing enough to solve that sort of problem?
I think it depends in which context you're talking about, really, on sort of bad algorithms and things like that. One of the things, there's a lot of stuff obviously around personal data and things like that that could certainly be tidied up. But then you've got the algorithms for things such as censorship across social media. You've got SEO algorithms, for instance, and what they call black box marketing algorithms and things like that. And each department of whatever is responsible for its own sector. I don't think it's something that sort of it could be globally controlled. It has to be regulated from an industry standpoint, because an algorithm is anything I choose it to be, if you like, and put it wherever I want it to do, to measure and respond however I want it to. So, you know, you've got light bulbs these days with algorithms in them.
Sure.
Well, not in them, but they're feeding, you know, fed by whatever. But like,
and so for you, Ben, on that sort of D&I thing, is it something you see or feel is true or innately true that AI is sometimes not very D&I or inclusive minded?
I suppose it's one of these things where you have to be very careful to analyze what is actually being done as a result of the analysis you're creating. And if it's creating disfavorable outcomes, because let's say you're working in the medical industry, for instance, I could see all sorts of horrible things happening there as externalities from bad data or bad analysis or bad reporting or poor AI that contains bias. I don't know technically what we do to resolve that. I suppose people have to be perhaps more mindful of looking for it in the first instance in whatever's being churned out the back end, and asking the question, what if, or what might be, or who might be being missed out here. And again, this is back to the thing around sort of research skills and research literacy in general. People worth their salt should be thinking about these things as a matter of course. I think you're muted, Graham.
So, yeah, the ice cream van always comes around at this time of night. So one of the things you both have talked about quite a lot here is that actually for AI to really work, humans need to both understand it and be trained to be AI users. Do you think that is something that market research teams should be focusing on? Is that something that an in-house insight team should be starting to look at, the training of that? Ben, I'll start open to you.
Yeah, I think often they're the ones who might need the training themselves. I know in lots of corporates, it can be one of these roles that people sort of stumble into without any formal training. I'm not saying you need to have a PhD in methodology in order to be able to do decent research, but I'm constantly surprised at how few people in those roles, or how few of those businesses invest in sort of upskilling in those areas. It's quite terrifying, actually. So there's a long way to go there. I almost feel as if people don't care enough. And I think it's back to this, and I'm only semi-joking when I talk about quantitative pornography being so pervasive. I think there's a whole thing around the culture of business here and what it sees in numbers versus things perhaps more qualitative. There's a certainty of the number on the page, I think, proves quite addictive when you're trying to cover your arse, etc. I could go down this rabbit hole for a long time. So put it this way, if I look at a lot of businesses dispassionately I've seen over the last 10 years, and you give me $500,000 to invest in AI, or $500,000 to, I don't know, have some whiz-bang jazz hands training for the exec team and or departmental leadership and directors, etc., on just standard research literacy and 101 stuff, I think you might in the first instance get more bang for your buck out of the latter than the former. Again, often I think it was Eddie Izzard talked about giving a gun to a baboon. There's a lot of that going off in businesses at the moment. So invest in the skills first. And that consulting side, you'll remember this, Graham. We invested a lot of time with most of our clients helping them to understand what we're doing methodologically and why it was correct, and why that we thought about their fears and these assumptions over here, and this is how we're doing it. Do you want to join us? It'd be great for you to muck in, get your hands and your sleeves rolled up yourself. We're trying to crunch down what we found out now. Come and join us in the war room and we'll show you how we go about it. It's going to be madness. So I think people need to be exposed to things other than just the data or just the output part.
Sure.
The mucky, grimy business that goes into the whole endeavor.
And from your point of view, Jason, is there a piece where you would either like your clients to be better educated or actually go through a process of educating them as they come into you?
Not so much my clients, because I make a living out of doing what they don't do or can't do, if you like. So I'm quite happy in that aspect. But it is, I think it's very much a case of learning the skills to remember, if you like, or use AI as a tool for a specific job. It's not, I think a lot of expectation due to maybe people's misunderstanding or exposure to AI, they think we've got AI, woohoo, wicked, it's going to do my job for me. And that's where the people lose trust, because you leave it to do your job for you, are monitored, and you don't tidy up the loose ends. So, the faith and the bad noise comes through as well. But like Ben said as well, because you're leaving it to the AI, you're not getting involved in the data or actually getting close to the story, noticing those nuances and that, that sarcasm, for instance, that you can pick up as a human that the AI would naturally miss. And therefore, you could say the skill set is definitely over and above the AI. Even a lot of these AI platforms, I'm very privileged. I get to work with a lot of my clients' platforms, as well as have a choice over which platforms I use, depending on the data sets. And I can safely say that no AI companies or platforms that I use have anywhere near got the user experience or user journey of actually human engagement with an AI platform right at all. It's a very much send it off to the AI says X and you deal with Y. And if you don't like that, you have to go through a longitudinal process to get all of that stuff again. You can't see it all at once. And, there's a lot for AI people to learn. And it's almost like another aspect where the user needs more involvement in the creation and the design of the AI applications, because at the moment, they're very much, I feel, left to developers to build that user journey based on people's lack of understanding or fear of their lack of understanding almost of AI. And maybe it's much more of a box ticking exercise, and like Ben said, covering your ass, and making sure that your paper trail's all secure, making sure that your budget's all right and you've got your data set, and that's so-and-so's job. But
sure. So there's one more question. So another question just for fun. Are humans better at inferring the emotional cultural landscape of other humans than machines? And does this limit the scope of what AI can do?
Yes.
So,
I mentioned that care survey earlier. And a good example of that is, like I said, a lot of the care working system don't speak English as their first language. So when they were saying things were good, they weren't saying things were good, if you like, because the rest of their language and everything else didn't back up what they were saying. You don't contain the other words, if you like, I won't rephrase, I would like say any examples, I can't remember exactly. But because it was a very blunt and sort of very forward language, there was no sentiment, if you like, with regards to sort of how you grammatically structure a sentence from an English or whatever educational background. It was very broken English. There was no sentiment. So you had to be a human, if you like, to be able to understand that A meant the same as B. They meant exactly the same thing, but actually if you read it, when AI read it, one would come out negative as a sentiment, one would come out positive.
Sure. And Ben, I suspect I know what your answer around this is, but are humans better at understanding emotions?
I think one-on-one, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any contest there. I think a well-trained human. I think that's the caveat here, isn't it? It's not humans; it's how well trained they are and what their knowledge set is. So humans are not all created equal when it comes to, some are rotten at research, some are absolutely bloody brilliant at it, and the difference between the two is absolutely profound. So I think it's a human's gig, and I think it's making the inferences, it's making the creative leaps, perhaps the things that an AI might find counterintuitive, and being genuinely inquisitive in the moment to pursue a particular line of inquiry on the hoof, looking for those little golden nuggets. I don't see AI being quite there yet, but not that I'd expect it to necessarily replace that level of sort of one-on-one human intuition. I don't think that's what it's for. I think it's it's a tool. Again, it's a brilliant, brilliant tool. I think it's still perhaps finding its place in some areas.
Yeah, so I think as we come towards the end of this, I think that actually quite neatly summarizes a lot of what we're talking about. I think, and please disagree if you do. Please say if you disagree. I think what we've said this. AI in market research is possibly neither utopian or dystopian. I think we've all said and all thought that there's a very heavy reliance on the human input to it, especially when you're doing research on humans. It feels to me that there should be more focus, from what you were saying, there should be more focus on the humans involved in market research handling AI than there possibly is. If you guys were going to give a last piece of advice to market research organizations that are looking at AI, and whether they're looking to buy it in or to use it on their projects, is there some place, something or somewhere that you think that those organizations and the individuals in them should look to make it more effective for them? Is there something that they should be doing to make AI more effective for them, or just to prevent, even if you take the worst case, to prevent bad outcomes? So Ben, do you got a view on that?
I'll keep it short and sweet. I think it's figure out what are the questions worth asking. I think a lot of it comes back down to that. If you really understand what you're trying to find out and why, and under exactly which rocks it might be found, and you've got strong hypothesis based in some kind of evidence and some kind of mixture of common sense and intuition, and maybe you've got a shot at making it work. So I think, yeah, that's probably halfway there, I think.
And Jason, your bit of advice for these organizations?
Great finish, Ben, and I completely agree. I'd say make it task specific, because I haven't seen a platform that can do it all yet. So, so choose your weapon wisely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. I think we've got to the stage where we profoundly agree to come to absolutely no conclusion whatsoever about whether it's utopian or dystopian, which 55 odd minutes into it is a fine effort. Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed that. I hope the guys who've been watching enjoyed it. Thank you for your time. I suspect that these conversations will rumble and run and become more sophisticated over time. But in the meantime, thank you very much, and thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you have any questions, drop me and my emails here. If you have any questions for these guys, they are findable.
I think just on that one, Graham, there's one more question in there. Someone's asking about auto tagging of free text.
Oh yeah.
I'll give a very quick take on
Okay.
AI and auto tagging from a qualitative perspective. It's horrible, and I hate everything it stands for. Now, because, again, it's robbing the researcher of the process, that inductive process of going through the messy qualitative mass and trying to figure out what the best tags might be in the first instance. And that's part of that creative leap part of the process. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. But I feel quite strongly about that one.
I have to say, because I like it in this sense, and the simple reason why is because once I get the data, the AI will pick out the biggest subjects that are spoken. Might not get them right, but it will at least direct me into building a sensible code frame without having to build, what I'm looking for. It gives me a good overview of what the story is saying before I go in and get the detail, essentially. So I find that useful.
Excellent. Okay, so we managed to find a point to end on a disagreement. Outstanding. Thank you so much, guys. A real pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And as I say, I suspect that there's various aspects of this that will run and run. And hopefully we'll get you back at some point to answer more questions on this.
Wonderful.
In the meantime, as I say, thank you, everybody. Thanks very much. Have a good evening. Bye now.
Take care, yourself.
Yeah.